Have you ever walked down a hallway only to find a door that shouldn't exist? A door with no purpose, no reason to be there, yet it beckons you. What happens when curiosity pushes you to open it? Would you risk your safety to uncover the secrets hidden behind it? In the door that shouldn't exist, the discovery of a mysterious door traps those who find it in a reality far darker than they could imagine. Time stops. Lives are altered. And a choice must be made, one that could cost you everything. Will you step through? There are places in the world that defy reason, spaces where time warps, and reality feels thin, fragile, like it could snap at any moment. The door that shouldn't exist is one of those places, a haunting, eerie phenomenon that appears when you least expect it, hidden just out of sight. It's the kind of door that doesn't belong, standing quietly in a hallway, tucked behind forgotten walls, beckoning those brave enough to question its origins. In the door that shouldn't exist, a group of unsuspecting office workers finds just such a door during a devastating building fire. When they step through, hoping for escape, they discover a world that feels familiar but different. Time doesn't pass. People don't age. The outside world has ceased to exist. They've entered a place where the boundaries of life and death, time and space, no longer hold true. As they wander this eerie new reality, they realize they've been chosen, not as survivors, but as specimens in an eternal loop of observation. The world they left behind has moved on, but they are forever stuck, unable to escape the horrors of a place where nothing decays, but no one can truly live. But it's not over. As time stretches on, one worker discovers a door labeled "Return" at a cost. The question remains, what cost is too high for freedom? Will they remain trapped, or will they dare to find out what lies beyond? The door that shouldn't exist isn't just about surviving. It's about confronting the unknown and the terrifying consequences of doing so. Story number 1. Kira Monroe had never been a believer in superstitions or folklore. To her, the world was a series of logical steps, a series of explanations waiting to be uncovered. She wasn't interested in the supernatural or mysteries that couldn't be solved with cold, hard facts. Yet, when she stumbled upon an old, run-down apartment building in the middle of town, she found herself drawn to it. It was cheap, the rent was low, and the building had character, something that her sterile, cookie-cutter dorms lacked. The worn bricks, the creaking floors, and the smell of dust and history gave it a charm, in a way. It felt like a place where she could escape her mundane, lonely college life and maybe, just maybe, figure out who she was. But there was something off about the place. The landlord, Mr. Del Rey, a hunched man with a gray beard and a permanent frown, warned her from the very start. "Never open the 13th door," he told her, his voice raspy like he was trying to keep a secret locked behind his lips. Kira, trying to ignore the oddness of the man, asked, "What's behind it?" He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes flicked nervously toward the basement door, as if it had a life of its own. "Don't open it, just don't," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm telling you, some things are better left alone." Kira wasn't the type to be scared by an old man's warnings. She laughed it off, thinking he was just one of those eccentric old-timer types who had stories for every nook and cranny in the building. She'd heard stranger things from her friend's grandparents. Still, the warning lingered in the back of her mind. It didn't take long before her curiosity started eating away at her. The 13th door. What could be so special about it? She had seen it every time she walked past the basement. The door was padlocked, the wood warped from years of neglect. The rest of the basement looked like any other. old boxes, broken furniture, a pile of abandoned junk. But that door, it called to her. One evening, when the hallways were quiet and her neighbors were either asleep or out, she found herself standing in front of it. She had spent weeks thinking about it, and now the time had come to uncover the truth. The padlock was surprisingly easy to break. She had to admit, a small part of her felt guilty for ignoring Mr. Del Rey's warning. But another part of her, something deep inside, was excited. She turned the knob. The door creaked open, and a cold breeze swept through her. What she found on the other side was like nothing she had ever seen. A long, narrow hallway stretched out before her, illuminated by a faint, flickering light. The walls seemed to bend and twist, as though the very structure of the house was alive. But it was the doors that caught her attention. One after another, all lined up on either side of the hallway. Each door was different. Some were painted in bright, inviting colors, while others were dark and ominous. The strangest part, though, was that each door had a number: 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 13. And behind each door, Kira could see herself. The first door she opened showed a version of her sitting at a desk, studying. She smiled, watching herself, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she typed furiously. It was a beautiful scene, peaceful, content. The second door showed her, with friends, laughing, surrounded by people she cared about. Her heart ached as she saw the joy on her own face. Was this what she had always wanted? A life full of connections and love? But with every door she opened, the visions grew darker. The third door showed Kira sitting alone in a dimly lit room, crying. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. A sense of deep despair lingered in the air. The fourth door was even worse. In it, Kira was trapped, screaming for help as dark figures surrounded her. The room was suffocating, and the cold was unbearable. She wanted to step back, but her feet felt frozen to the floor. She reached for the next door, trembling, but before she could open it, a voice, her own voice, whispered from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." Kira froze. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing in the hallway was herself, but not quite. This version of her was different, darker, with eyes that gleamed with malice. "You weren't supposed to open the door," the twisted version of Kira said, her smile cold and unsettling. "But now that you have, I can't let you leave." Kira's breath caught in her throat. She turned to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. Each door she passed showed another twisted version of herself, each one more terrifying than the last. Some versions smiled at her, while others reached out with hands that were too long, too skeletal. Some were already half-formed, as though they were still emerging from the shadows, trying to take shape. With every step, it became harder to breathe. The hallway seemed to warp, the walls closing in on her. Her heart raced, panic setting in. She needed to find the exit. She needed to get back to her reality, but the deeper she went, the harder it became to retrace her steps. And then, just as the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, she heard a voice, a familiar one. "Kira." It was Brian, a classmate who had been helping her look into the building's history. He had come searching for her after she had disappeared into the basement. His face appeared at the end of the hallway, a faint light flickering around. "Him! Kira, you have to come back. Now!" She reached for him, but the darkness began to pull her away. With one final desperate effort, she turned and ran, her legs feeling like lead. She didn't know how long she had been running, but eventually she burst through the basement door, gasping for air, her heart hammering in her chest. But something was wrong. She didn't recognize the apartment. The walls were fresh, the furniture was new, and the air was thick with an unfamiliar scent. And when she looked into the mirror across the room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. It was her face, but not hers. The woman in the mirror smiled, her lips stretching unnaturally wide. Kira's own eyes stared back at her, vacant and empty, filled with a darkness that wasn't hers. The door had closed behind her, but it wasn't her apartment anymore. Someone else was living her life now, and the woman in the mirror was wearing her face. Story number 2. Miguel Alvarez had never been one to believe in ghost stories or legends. He was a man of hard work, of sweat on his brow and calluses on his hands. As a construction worker trying to make ends meet, he had a job to do. And when the opportunity came up to work on the conversion of the old cannery into luxury condos, he jumped at it. The money was good, too good to pass up. The building had been abandoned for years, a relic from a different time. But now it was being resurrected into something new, something sleek, something profitable. Still, there was something about the place that gnawed at him. The cannery had a dark history. The air always felt heavy, thick with memories that didn't belong to the present. There were stories that lingered in the neighborhood, whispers about the factory's past, about things that were better left unsaid. But Miguel wasn't one for listening to rumors. He had a daughter to feed and bills to pay, and the job was as simple as it got. At least, that's what he told himself. It was on the 3rd week of demolition when Miguel first saw it. The door. It wasn't listed in any of the plans, hidden away deep in the building's guts, tucked behind a stack of rusted machinery and old crates. The door was made of thick, solid wood, with a strange weathered iron handle that seemed out of place. There was a plaque on the door, faded and half obscured by years of grime, but Miguel could still make out the words, "Feeding room, do not open." Miguel wasn't the superstitious type, but something about that door unsettled him. He stared at it for a moment, his hand hovering over the handle. He thought about reporting it to Dana, the architect, but figured it was probably some old storage room left behind from the cannery's days. Nothing to worry about. That night, after a long shift, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the door was calling to him. His daughter, Lucy, was at home with a babysitter, safe for now, but Miguel couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him as he worked alone in the building. He wasn't scared. He was just curious. And that curiosity got the better of him. Miguel took a crowbar from the toolbox, gripped it tight, and began prying the door open. The wood groaned as it moved, as though the building itself was resisting. Finally, with a loud crack, the door gave way. Behind it was a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was thick and foul, a mixture of decay and rot. The walls were lined with strange carvings, ancient symbols etched into the stone. There was no furniture, no storage, just emptiness. And in the center of the room was a large pit, dark and deep, like an abyss that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. A low whisper filled the room, soft at first, then growing louder. The words were indistinct, but Miguel could make out a few. Hungry. So hungry. The whisper wrapped around him, drawing him in, making his pulse quicken. He felt a strange, gnawing sensation in his stomach, a hunger that he couldn't understand. He stepped back, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving him standing there, sweating, with his heart racing. He couldn't explain it, but something inside him told him he had just made a terrible mistake. The next day, things began to change. The building felt different, heavier somehow. The air was thick, suffocating as if it were alive, breathing in the dust and debris around it. And then the tenants started disappearing. It began with small things. Furniture shifted when no one was around. Objects went missing, strange sounds echoing through the halls in the dead of night. People thought it was just the noise of construction, but then people started to vanish. First, it was a single woman, Dana's client, who had been staying in one of the finished units. She disappeared without a trace. Then another tenant, and another. Miguel tried to ignore it, but as the days wore on, he noticed something terrible, something worse than he could have imagined. The building was alive. It was feeding on the tenants, drawing them in one by one, like cattle to slaughter. The whispers had returned louder this time, urging him to give in. "Feed us." "We hunger," Miguel couldn't tell anyone. Officer Reeds, a local cop who had been skeptical about the whole project, told him it was probably just people leaving in the night. There was no proof of anything strange happening, no evidence to link the disappearances together. Dana, the architect, was worried but dismissive. She was too focused on the project to believe in supernatural nonsense. But Miguel knew. He knew the building had woken up, and now it wouldn't stop until it had consumed them all. The worst was yet to come. One night, after another day of fruitless searching for the missing tenants, Miguel returned home to find Lucy sitting in the living room, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered. "I heard voices. In the walls. They're calling me." Miguel's stomach turned. His heart sank. His daughter had never been scared like this before. She had never imagined things. He held her close, trying to reassure her. But deep down, he knew the truth. The building was hungry, and now it was calling to her. The next day, the whispers became unbearable. "Lucy, Lucy." Miguel could feel the pull, the suffocating grip of the building's hunger, and he knew it was too late for him. The building wanted her. It wanted his daughter. In a final act of desperation, Miguel made a decision. He would end this, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He returned to the basement, where the whispers were the loudest. The feeding room. Daughter was open again, waiting for him. He walked into the room, feeling the walls close in around him, and stepped into the pit at its center. He could feel the darkness consuming him, pulling at his soul, but he didn't fight it. He knew what he had to do. With one last scream, he gave himself to the building. The next day, there were no more whispers, no more disappearances. But it wasn't over. Months later, the cannery was bought by a new developer, someone eager to continue. Renovations. The building stood silent and still, but its hunger never ceased, and in the shadows, the whispers began once more. Feed us. Story number 3. Rachel Finn had never been good at sitting still. Her life as a soldier had been filled with noise, chaos, and constant movement. Always on the move. Always in the thick of things. So when she decided to escape it all, to find some peace in the remote isolation of the mountain lodge, she thought she'd found the perfect place. No phone calls, no emails, just the woods, the mountains, and the silence. The lodge was small, tucked away at the foot of a towering range of jagged peaks. The air was thin and crisp, and the trees were ancient, their trunks thick with age. Rachel had read about the place online, an old mountain retreat turned into a rustic getaway for people looking to disconnect. The photos were inviting. The promise of seclusion even more so. But from the moment she arrived, something didn't feel right. The lodge was run by Steve, a gruff man with a permanent scowl, and the other guests were just as strange. Elijah, a reclusive author who rarely left his room, and Mia, a troubled teenage runaway who barely spoke. Rachel tried not to think too much about it. She had enough of her own demons to wrestle with, the ghosts of her past haunting her whenever the silence got too deep. That first night, she sat alone by the fire, listening to the crackle of the flames, trying to push away the memories. But then it happened. From the corner of her eye, Rachel saw it. A wooden door. It wasn't there before. She was sure of it. It stood in the corner of the room, a simple, unremarkable door framed by chipped wood and rusted hinges. Rachel blinked and turned away. Must be the stress, she thought. Maybe she was just imagining it. But when she looked back, the door was still there, waiting. She stood up, walked toward it, and ran her hand along the frame. It felt old, cold. There was no handle, no knob, just the door. What the hell? She muttered, turning back to the fire. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Maybe she just overlooked it when she first arrived. She sat back down, tried to focus on the warmth of the flames, but something gnawed at her. The door? It wasn't right. It was wrong, somehow. It felt like it didn't belong, like it had been there long before the lodge had ever been built. The next morning, Rachel told Steve about it. "You seen the door?" she asked. Steve just shrugged, not even looking up from his coffee. "What? Door?" Rachel's stomach twisted. "The one in the corner of the common room. It wasn't there last night." Steve's face hardened like he was trying to hold back a secret. "There's no door like that here, Rachel. You're imagining things." But Rachel knew she wasn't imagining it. She couldn't shake the feeling that the door had been watching her, waiting for something. That night, when the others had gone to bed, Rachel was the last one awake. She glanced over at the corner again, expecting to see the door, but it wasn't there. The wall was empty. For a moment, she felt a strange relief, but then, without warning, she heard it. The creak of wood. Slowly, the door appeared again. It was standing in the same spot as if it had been there the entire time. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't right. She took a deep breath and approached it again, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the wood. This time, she saw the faint outline of something behind the door. Shadows, shapes, something, moving. She stepped back, her pulse racing. What the hell was that? Mia, the teenage runaway, appeared from the hallway, her eyes wide. "I saw it too," she whispered, her voice shaky. "The door. It moved." Rachel nodded, her throat dry. "I know. I don't understand it." Mia's eyes flicked nervously toward the door, then back to Rachel. "What if it wants something from us?" Before Rachel could respond, the door creaked open. A low, guttural sound came from behind it. A whisper, barely audible, but it made Rachel's skin crawl. "Feed. Feed us." Without thinking, Rachel grabbed Mia's arm and pulled her back. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice hoarse. "Now." But when they turned to leave, Steve appeared in the hallway. His face was pale, his eyes glazed. "You can't leave," he said, his voice hollow. "Not while it's awake. It feeds on us. It always has." Rachel shook her head. "What do you mean? What the hell are you talking about?" Steve's expression twisted like he was caught between two worlds. "This lodge. It's alive. It's been alive for as long as I can remember. The door. It's the key. The door moves. It feeds. It wants us." Rachel looked back at the door, which now stood wide open. She could feel it, like something was pulling her toward it. "Come, closer, let us in." Over the next few days, things started to unravel. The door kept moving, appearing in different places around the lodge. No one could stop it. No one could remember where it came from or why it kept appearing. And then, the disappearances started. First, it was Elijah. He'd vanished without a trace, his room left undisturbed. The others didn't seem concerned. They were too afraid to speak of it. too afraid of acknowledging what was happening. It was as if they all knew, deep down, that something terrible was taking place, but none of them wanted to face it. And then Mia disappeared. One moment she was sitting by the fire, the next she was gone, without a sound. Rachel was alone now, and the door had become closer. Every time it was ignored, it appeared right in front of her like a predator closing in on its prey. The door wasn't just moving. It was feeding on their fear. It fed on the guilt they all carried, the things they'd done or left undone. Rachel could feel it, deep in her bones. The door was a manifestation of their collective trauma, their collective guilt, brought to life by the darkness of the mountains. It was hunting them. Rachel was the last one left. That night, the door appeared again, standing at the foot of her bed, its frame crooked and dark. She could hear it whispering, feel the weight of its hunger. It was close. Too close. And then, in a moment of clarity, Rachel understood. The door wasn't just a door. It was a trap. A hunter that moved only when ignored, when forgotten. The more they ran from it, the closer it came. Rachel locked eyes with the door. She had two choices: to look away, to run and be consumed, or to face it and never look back. And so, she stood there, unblinking, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. She stared into the blackness of the door. It will never stop moving, she realized. It feeds on fear. But she wouldn't let it have her. Not this time. She stared and she waited. Forever. Story number 4. The town of Hollow Creek was the kind of place that never made the news. It wasn't big enough to matter, and it didn't have much to offer except miles of farmland and a few crooked houses on winding dirt roads. People there lived simple lives, most of them working the fields or running small businesses. But what Hollow Creek lacked in excitement, it made up for in stories. Stories that people passed down through generations. The kind of stories that everyone knew but no one really believed. Except, maybe, deep down, they did. Jenny Clark didn't believe in any of it. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses. She didn't believe in old legends about cursed houses or dark woods. She didn't even believe in the old red door behind the church. But she knew about it. Everyone did. The door that no one talked about. The door that people swore was locked, but everyone also swore they'd heard knocking coming from it late at night. The legend was simple. Knock 3 times on the red door behind St. Mark's Church, and your deepest desire would be granted. Of course, Jenny had heard the story dozens of times growing up. It was a joke, something to tell around campfires or when the conversation lagged at a party. Nobody took it seriously, except Tyler, her best friend. He believed it, or at least he wanted to believe it. That's why, one summer night, after one too many drinks and one too many dares, Tyler dared her to go knock 3 times on the door. Jenny laughed it off at first. Seriously, you want me to do that? You've lost it. But Tyler, his eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and excitement, wouldn't let it go. I dare you, Jen. Just 1 knock. It's harmless, and if something happens, we'll have the best story ever. You know you want to. Jenny felt the old thrill in her chest. The one that had always pushed her to take risks, to do the things that other people were too scared to try. It was how she lived her life, how she dealt with the mess in her head, the pain of things she didn't talk about. Thrills and dares were the only things that made her feel alive, the only things that made her forget. So, despite the twinge of unease in her gut, Jenny agreed. She and Tyler made their way to the church, their footsteps soft in the quiet night. The church sat on a hill, silhouetted against the dark sky. its steeple pointing like a finger to the heavens. Behind it, hidden in the shadows, was the red door. It was old, worn, and covered in moss like it hadn't been touched in years. But the town's old-timers insisted it was still there, still sealed. Tyler gave her an encouraging push. "Go on, Jen. Knock 3 times. The door won't open. Nothing will happen. But if it does..." He grinned, but there was an edge to his voice. "We'll be legends." Jenny didn't think about it too hard. She walked up to the door, feeling the cool wood beneath her fingertips. The red was fading, almost black in the dim light, but there was something about it that made her pause. Something that made her throat tighten. She shook it off. 3 knocks, hard and fast. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the night, and for a moment nothing happened. The wind stirred and the trees rustled, but the door didn't open. Jenny laughed, feeling foolish. "See, told you, nothing." But then the ground beneath her feet seemed to shudder, like a breath from deep below. The air turned cold, and Jenny's laughter died in her throat. Tyler, who had been standing a few steps behind her, suddenly froze. Something was happening. Something wrong. The door creaked. Slowly, agonizingly slow, it started to open. A horrible, guttural sound rose from beneath the earth. Something ancient and terrible, and it made Jenny's skin crawl. She wanted to run, but her feet were stuck to the ground. The door opened wider, revealing nothing but blackness. She couldn't see what was beyond, but she felt it. A presence, something that watched. Tyler was the first to move, backing away, his face white with terror. "What did you do?" he gasped, but Jenny couldn't respond. She was frozen, her body trembling. The whisper came next, soft at first, then louder, clearer. "I know your desire, Jenny Clark." Her heart slammed in her chest. The voice wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting for years, centuries, buried deep beneath the church. "I know what you want, and I will give it to you." Jenny's blood ran cold. She had heard the stories. She knew what the door was. It wasn't a place where wishes came true. It was a seal, a prison, and the thing on the other side, the thing that waited, fed on desires. It granted them, but always with a twisted cost. A monkey's paw curse, a life for a life. She tried to pull away, but the door seemed to draw her in. Her legs moved of their own accord, bringing her closer to the dark pit behind it. The whispers grew louder. She saw shadows shifting, curling around the edges of the doorframe like fingers reaching for her. "Come closer, Jenny. Your desire is here." Jenny's mind raced. She could feel it, the weight of the desire she had buried deep inside, the thing she'd never told anyone about, the one thing that gnawed at her, the thing she thought would make everything better. But it wasn't real. It was just a lie. The door wasn't going to make her pain go away. It was going to feed on it. But it was too late. She had already opened the door. The ground beneath her cracked open, and a cold, clawed hand shot up, wrapping around her ankle, pulling her toward the blackness. She screamed, but Tyler was already running, disappearing into the night. Everything went dark. When Jenny awoke, she was back at the church, her hands gripping the cold, red doorframe. The night was silent, and the air was heavy with something foul. Her body felt strange, disjointed, foreign. And then she understood. The door hadn't granted her wish. It had cursed her. It had made her the new gatekeeper, the one who would watch over the door forever. And the whispers? They were hers now, too. The door had fed on her desire, and now it was using her to feed on others. Jenny couldn't run. She couldn't leave. The door was hers to guard, to keep shut. And if anyone else knocked, she would have to let them in. She would have to give them their darkest desires, forever. Story number 5. Sarah Dalton had always dreamed of a perfect family. She and James had spent years trying to conceive, navigating the quiet heartbreak of infertility, and then the quiet joy when their little girl, Lily, was finally born. They had moved into the old house on Elm Street, a charming 2-story Victorian with creaky floors and an overgrown garden that seemed to whisper secrets on the wind. It was the kind of home you imagined raising a family in. But the house, like all old houses, had its own history, and it wasn't the kind of history you wanted to dig into. At first, everything was perfect. Lily slept soundly through the night, and Sarah found herself basking in the glow of motherhood. But soon, as her postpartum anxiety crept in, she began to notice things, small things, that didn't feel quite right. It started with the cries. Every night, like clockwork, Lily would wake at exactly 3 a.m. At first, Sarah chalked it up to a routine. Babies, after all, had odd sleep patterns. But the crying was different, piercing in a way that made Sarah's heart race. It was as if someone was calling out for help, desperate and pleading. James, always the skeptic, insisted it was just the baby being fussy. "She's adjusting to the house," he said one night, holding her hand as they listened to the cries. "It's nothing." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was when she noticed the door that she realized she wasn't imagining things. It wasn't a door they'd noticed before. It was a small, narrow wooden door that had been concealed behind Lily's dresser. It was sealed, but there was something about it, something odd. The house had plenty of quirky features, but this door felt out of place. No one had mentioned it when they'd moved in, and the realtor had never mentioned any hidden rooms or oddities. One evening, while James was out at a late meeting, Sarah decided to investigate. She moved the dresser away from the wall, her hands shaking slightly. The door was small, no more than a foot wide, with a thick layer of dust on it. The wood was dark, almost black, and the handle was tarnished, worn smooth from years of neglect. Her heart pounded in her chest. She stood there, staring at it. What was behind this door? She reached for the handle and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was identical to Lily's nursery. Same pale walls, same soft carpet, same crib with a plush mobile hanging above it. But there was one difference. In the crib lay another baby, a second Lily. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The baby in the crib looked exactly like Lily. Same tiny hands, same soft curls, but its smile was too wide, too stretched. It was unnatural, the kind of smile you'd expect from a puppet, not a real child. The air in the room grew colder, the darkness deeper, and Sarah's heart began to race. What was happening? She reached out to the crib, her fingers trembling, but then a soft voice from behind her made her freeze. "Don't open the door," a woman's voice warned. Sarah spun around to see Mrs. Cray standing in the doorway of the hallway, her eyes wide and fearful. Mrs. Cray was the former tenant of the house, an elderly woman who had lived there alone for years before they moved in. She had warned Sarah, casually, the day they signed the papers, that the house had its quirks, but nothing more. Now, Mrs. Cray's face was pale, her hands trembling. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's behind this door? Who is this baby?" Mrs. Cray's lips trembled as she stepped into the nursery. "That door," she said, pointing at the sealed door, "has been there for as long as I can remember. And that thing in there isn't a baby. It's a parasite, a mimic. It feeds on the love you give to your child. Sarah's heart sank. What do you mean? The door is a gateway, Mrs. Cray explained, her voice quivering with fear. It leads to a liminal space, something between worlds. The creature behind it isn't just a copy. It's a soul stealer, a doppelganger that wants to replace your real child. It mimics the love you feel for your baby. It feeds on it until it can take her place. Sarah shook her head. No, this is impossible. Lily is my daughter. Mrs. Cray's eyes darkened. I thought the same when my own daughter was born, but it was already too late. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. The baby behind the door. It was wrong. The smile was too wide, the eyes too knowing. And when she thought about it, when she looked at Lily's crib, she saw something darker behind her daughter's innocent gaze. What if it was true? The crying started again that night, at 3 a.m., like clockwork. But this time Sarah didn't feel the warmth of motherhood when she went to her daughter's crib. She felt the chill of uncertainty, of something foreign in the room with her. She stood over Lily's crib, looking at her daughter's peaceful face, and then glanced toward the door. The second crib, the second Lily, its smile stretched wider now, its eyes burning with hunger. Suddenly, Sarah understood. The door wasn't just a way to get into another room. It was a trap, a test. The creature behind it was waiting, feeding on her maternal love, on the connection she shared with Lily. It needed that bond to survive. It would keep appearing, night after night, until it replaced her daughter completely. I have to choose, Sarah realized. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest like a stone. If she chose wrong, she would lose both babies. If she chose right, she would have to live with the choice for the rest of her life. Her hands shook as she reached for the crib. She lifted Lily from her bed, feeling her soft warmth against her chest. She turned toward the door, and for a moment she thought she saw the mimic baby's eyes following her. She stepped backward, never taking her eyes off the second crib. Her heart pounded. She could feel the cold breath of the entity behind the door, could hear the whispers calling to her. Choose me. Choose me. But Sarah held Lily tighter, clutching her daughter to her chest. No. She wasn't going to lose her. With a final, desperate glance at the door, she slammed it shut. The crying stopped. The room went quiet. The air, once thick with dread, now felt still. Sarah stood in the darkness, holding her daughter. It was over, but she knew that the door would always be there, waiting. It would always be watching, and someday it would try again. Story number 6. Lana Cho had always been drawn to the water. Growing up near the coast, she spent her childhood swimming in the ocean, diving into the deep, exploring the hidden world beneath the surface. But there was a dark chapter in her past she never spoke about. The near drowning when she was 7. It had been a freak accident. She'd wandered too far from the shore, the waves pulling her under, her lungs filling with salt water. She'd survived, but the terror of that moment never left her. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, a part of her that she could never quite shake. Now, years later, as a marine biologist, Lana had made peace with the water. It was her career, her life. She spent her days studying the mysteries of the sea, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to find beneath the lake. The lake in question was Lake Warwick, a long-forgotten body of water tucked away in the hills. Years ago, the village of Warwick had been flooded when the government decided to build a reservoir, drowning everything beneath the surface. It was just another lake to most people, but to the locals, it was a place full of stories. Ghost stories. Legends of a town buried under the water. Of strange things seen in the depths. Of dreams that never stopped. Dr. Yates, a historian who specialized in local folklore, had invited Lana to join a dive team. They were looking for artifacts, relics, of the village that had been submerged all those years ago. The team was small, just Lana, Caleb the diver, and Maya, her younger sister, who'd come along for the ride. It was supposed to be a straightforward project, nothing out of the ordinary. But when they found the door, things started to unravel. They had been diving for days, combing the lake bed for anything of interest, when Caleb spotted it. A heavy, old door, bolted into the mud at the deepest part of the lake. It was large, rectangular, and strangely intact for something so old. The surface was covered in barnacles and thick layers of algae, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. It looked out of place, the kind of door that belonged in a house, not at the bottom of a lake. "What the hell is this?" Caleb asked, his voice muffled by his diving mask. Lana had no answer. She swam closer, her heart racing. There was something about the door, something that unsettled her. "We need to bring it up," Dr. Yates's voice crackled through the radio. It could be something important, historical, maybe even tied to the village. Reluctantly, Lana agreed. The team worked together to attach the cables and raise the door. When it finally broke free from the lake bed, the water around them grew still, unnaturally still. It was as if the lake itself had gone silent, holding its breath. Lana's pulse quickened and a cold shiver ran down her spine. But they didn't notice anything strange at first. The door was raised onto the boat, and they began their trip back to shore. As they moved, the water around them was eerily calm, a glassy surface with no ripples, no current. The boat cut through the water like a knife through butter, and even the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the world itself had slowed down. The nightmares began the next night. Lana couldn't sleep. She kept dreaming of a village, an old, crumbling town beneath the water, its streets empty, its houses abandoned. But she wasn't just watching the village. She was in it. She was walking through the dark, fog-covered streets, hearing whispers, feeling cold hands brush against her skin. Every time she tried to run, the ground would shift beneath her feet, the water would rise, and she'd be pulled down into the depths. She woke up gasping for air. The memories of the dream lingering, suffocating her. The following days were no better. Caleb, the experienced diver, disappeared without a trace. His boat was found adrift in the middle of the lake, the engine still running. No sign of him. No explanation. The authorities said it was an accident, but Lana knew better. The water had taken him, and the nightmares kept coming. People in the nearby town began reporting strange dreams, too. Night after night, they dreamed of the village, of the door, and worse, the people who lived there. They saw them in their dreams, the villagers, pale, ghostly figures with hollow eyes, standing in the streets, watching, always watching. And then the drownings began. At first, it was just one person, an old man who had always lived by the lake. He was found face down in his bathtub, water dripping from his ears, his eyes wide open in terror. Then another person, and another. Each drowning was different, but all of them had one thing in common. They were all linked to the door. Lana felt it too. The pull, the sensation that something was growing inside her, an insatiable hunger, a longing. The village beneath the water was alive in her dreams. It was waiting for her, waiting for them all. It wasn't just a town. It was a psychic entity, a ghost town that fed on the dreams of the living. And the more they thought about it, the more they dreamed about it, the more it reached out. Dr. Yates was the first to succumb to the call. He couldn't stop thinking about the door, about the village. He spent hours poring over the history of the town that had been swallowed by the lake. He found records, old journals and diaries detailing a strange cult that had once lived in the town, performing rituals to the water, worshipping something deep beneath the earth. The door had been the final seal, the last barrier between the world of the living and whatever lay below. The village wasn't just a town, it was a cult that had bound itself to the water, feeding on the minds of the living, feeding on the connection between them. And now, the door was open. The village was coming back. One night, Lana went to the lake alone. She stood at the edge, staring into the dark water, the door on the shore behind her. She knew what she had to do. The village wanted her. It wanted them all. But there was only one way to stop it, one way to silence the nightmares, to end the drownings. She had to return the door. She dove into the lake, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had to do. As she swam deeper, the water grew colder and the pressure in her chest intensified. She could feel the pull beneath her, the town reaching out, calling to her. The door had to go back. It was the only way. She reached the lake bed, her hands trembling, as she placed the door back into the muck. As soon as she did, the lake seemed to take a deep breath and the water calmed. The pull lessened. The nightmares stopped. But Lana knew, as she looked up at the dark surface above her, that she would never be free. She had sealed herself away, trapped beneath the water, bound to the village that lived on psychically. And the lake would always be there, waiting. Forever. Story number 7. Dev Patel was used to chasing legends. As a travel blogger, it was part of the job, finding hidden gems, unraveling secrets, and uncovering the kind of stories people whispered about but never really believed. Most of the time, the rumors were just that, rumors. But then there were places like the famous Thornwood Hotel, a hotel that had been standing for over a century, with its grand facade and opulent halls, but also a strange reputation. Rumors of a room that didn't exist. A room that no one talked about. A room that the hotel's management seemed to want to forget. Room 0. Dev's curiosity was piqued when he first heard about it, hidden deep in the recesses of the hotel's past. The staff wouldn't acknowledge it. No guests seemed to know about it, yet people still swore it was real. Old legends claimed that if you were unlucky enough to find it, the hotel would rewrite your past. Your memories would change, twist, and erase what you thought you knew about yourself. Just a story, Dev thought. That is, until he checked in. The Thornwood Hotel was as luxurious as its reputation suggested. The lobby gleamed with golden chandeliers, and the rooms were all perfectly furnished in that nostalgic old-world charm. But there was something wrong about the place. The air had a heavy feel, like time itself had gotten stuck here. Dev didn't expect much, just a night to write a blog post and add to the growing collection of urban legends he had explored. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. It started, innocently enough. Dev had dropped his suitcase in his room, grabbed his camera, and decided to take a tour of the hotel. He wandered through the long, winding hallways, passing antique paintings, dim-lit corridors, and doorways that seemed to lead nowhere. But then he found a door. It was tucked away in a corner, barely noticeable. A door that didn't match the rest of the hotel. It was older, the wood cracked and peeling, and the brass handle was tarnished and cold to the touch. The oddest part? There was no number, no label, and no name for it. Just a faintly etched Room 0 on the faded brass plate. Dev's curiosity got the better of him. He took a step closer, his hand hovering over the handle. Something felt off. Maybe it was the way the room seemed to watch him. Maybe it was the way the door almost invited him. But he hesitated. "Room 0, he whispered, his breath catching. He glanced around the hallway. The coast was clear. With a flick of his wrist, he twisted the knob and stepped inside. The room was like nothing he'd ever seen. The air was still, suffocating. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, seemed ancient, like it had been there for decades, maybe even longer. The bed in the center of the room was covered in dust, the sheets yellowed with age. But what struck him most was the overwhelming silence. No hum of the lights, no sounds of life from the hallway, just stillness. The most unsettling thing, though, was the mirror above the vanity. It was cracked, the glass fogged over, but as Dev approached it, he saw something, someone, reflected in the fog. For a moment, it was just his own face staring back, but then the image shifted. He saw a younger version of himself. In his mind, he recognized the scene, his childhood home, his mother standing in the doorway, smiling. He saw his father's face, filled with pride as he handed him a soccer trophy. But it wasn't his memory. It couldn't be. He never played soccer as a kid. Dev stepped back, his heart racing. He reached for his phone, but when he turned it on, the battery was already dead. No signal, no internet. Panic started to set in. Room 0, he whispered again, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. This can't be real. Just then, the door creaked open behind him, and an old man stepped inside. The man was dressed in a sharp suit, his face pale and sunken, his eyes too wide, as if he hadn't slept in years. His name, Dev learned later, was Mr. Hall, the hotel manager. Mr. Hall smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, I see you've discovered it," he said, his voice almost too calm. Room 0, the door that was never meant to be opened. Dev froze, his mouth dry. What is this place? What happened to my phone? Mr. Hall stepped closer, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. Room 0 is a place of memories, he said, his voice low. It doesn't just store them, it rewrites them. Whatever you've seen here, whatever you've remembered, it isn't yours. The room chooses. It takes what you've forgotten, what you've lost, and makes you believe it was always yours. Dev tried to step back, but Mr. Hall was already at the door, locking it behind him. "You see," Mr. Hall continued, "I've been the manager here for a very long time, but I wasn't always like this. The room chose me. It took me when I was young, and now I can't leave. The room needs a new manager, someone to keep it alive, to keep it contained. And you, my friend, have just found the key." Dev felt his head spin. "You're lying. You're trapping me." Mr. Hall's grin widened. "I didn't want to, but you see, you've already fallen into the trap. The room feeds on your memories, your desires. It rewrites your past until it's all twisted and strange. And now, you'll be here, like me. You'll become the new keeper of the hotel." Dev shook his head, his body shaking with fear. "No, I won't. I won't stay here." But as the minutes passed, Dev began to feel it. The pull, the memories, the false ones, started creeping in, invading his mind. He started remembering things that had never happened, things he wished had happened. It was like a sickness, slowly eating away at his mind. Angela, the maid, had warned him earlier that day. She had tried to tell him something, but it was too late now. Mr. Hall was right. The room had already started to take him. By the time Samir arrived, Dev had already started to forget. His cousin knocked on the door, but it was Mr. Hall who opened, it smiling wide. "Welcome to the Thornwood," Mr. Hall said, his voice eerily calm. "I think you'll fit in just fine." Years passed. Dev, now wearing the same sharp suit as Mr. Hall, stood behind the front desk of the Thornwood Hotel. He looked into the mirror, seeing not his own face, but someone else's, a stranger. His memories were scattered, pieces of someone else's life, someone else's past. He smiled grimly, knowing there was no way out, no escape. And when the next guest arrived, the next victim, he would greet them with the same cold smile. Because in the end, the hotel always wins, forever. Story number 8. Nadia Rojas had always been obsessed with the past. As an anthropologist, she had dedicated her life to uncovering the lost secrets of the ancient world. The ruins were her home, the crumbling walls and forgotten tombs her sanctuary. There was something sacred about digging through the layers of history, about finding the things that had been buried for centuries, sometimes millennia. But some things should stay buried. The church was an ancient ruin, crumbling at the edge of a small village that had long since disappeared from maps. Nadia and her team had been digging in the church's crypt for weeks, looking for anything that could shed light on the town's strange disappearance. There had been whispers, of course, stories that the place was cursed, that the townsfolk had vanished in the dead of night with no explanation. But Nadia wasn't a believer in curses. She was a believer in facts, in the solid, scientific evidence that history provided. When they discovered the door, hidden behind a pile of broken stone and dust, Nadia was intrigued. It wasn't a door in the traditional sense. It was a grotesque, bone-covered structure, its frame made of twisted, gnarled shapes, and the surface was covered in something that looked like teeth. Rows and rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. Each one sharp and uneven, but all strangely alive. The sight of it made Nadia's stomach twist, but her curiosity burned brighter than her discomfort. "Look at this," she called to Dr. Ellis, her skeptical partner who had been brushing off the superstitions of the villagers. "This wasn't built, it's grown." Dr. Ellis came over, shaking his head. "Nadia, you can't be serious. This doesn't make sense." But Nadia couldn't tear her eyes away from the door. There was something about it, something that felt wrong, like it was breathing, like it was waiting. She could hear faint whispers in the back of her mind, soft and indistinct, as if the door was speaking to her, calling her. "Get the tools," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "We're opening it." The door creaked loudly as they pried it open. And then, when it finally gave way, something strange happened. The air grew still. The walls seemed to close in on them. The whispers grew louder, clearer. They weren't coming from the door. They were coming from the very air around them, as if the crypt itself was alive. Nadia felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Sweet, sickly, like something rotting. And then it was as if the world shifted. The crypt began to pulse, the walls seeming to breathe, the floor beneath her feet vibrating like a heartbeat. "God," Luke, the young assistant, whispered. He looked pale, his eyes wide with fear. "What have you done?" Before anyone could respond, the air around them thickened. Nadia felt something latch onto her mind, an overwhelming sense of dread, an oppressive weight that made her feel as though she were sinking. She heard the whispers clearer now, each one different, each one a voice, murmuring terrible things. Things about sin, about guilt, about punishment, and then they began to change. Luke screamed. Nadia turned to see his face contorted, his body spasming as his hands gripped his head. His skin was changing, twisting in strange, unnatural ways, as if it were being rearranged, reformed by some unseen force. His fingers grew longer, stretching, out like claws. His mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came out. And then his eyes. His eyes began to bulge, his pupils shrinking until they were nothing more than pinpricks of black against the white of his eyes. "Get him out of here!" Dr. Ellis shouted, but Nadia couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, watching as Luke's body began to distort, his skin shifting into something monstrous, something wrong. The whispers grew louder, the air thicker, and suddenly, the room seemed to warp around them. The door had opened something that wasn't supposed to be let out. Nadia could feel it, the presence, the entity that had been waiting. It wasn't just a door, it was a portal, a door to somewhere else, somewhere terrible. But it wasn't until the door fully opened that they realized how much they had unleashed. Beyond the door was a world unlike anything Nadia had ever imagined. It was a dimension, but not a traditional one. It was made of flesh, of sin, of everything dark and twisted that humanity had ever done. The sky was a sickly shade of red, and the land was a mass of writhing, living tendrils, organic, pulsing, and grotesque. There were figures moving in the distance, humanoid shapes that were only half-formed, their bodies flickering in and out of existence. It was a place of endless suffering, of endless guilt. And the door, it was feeding. The longer they looked at it, the larger it became. The teeth grew longer, sharper, and the whispers grew louder, each one more insistent, more demanding. It was as if the door had seen them, acknowledged their curiosity, and now it wanted more. It wanted their souls. It wanted them to look, to feed on their desire to know, to understand. Nadia couldn't tear herself away from it. She had to know. She had to understand what it was. And as she took a step forward, the room seemed to move with her. The walls of the crypt began to melt, turning into flesh, turning into something living. The floor buckled beneath her feet, and the door seemed to swell, reaching out for her. But then, as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. Nadia turned to see Dr. Ellis. His face was pale, his mouth moving as if to say something, but no words came out. He was frozen, and then, just as quickly his body began to dissolve, to melt into the floor, as though the very flesh of the world had claimed him. Luke was already gone, his body twisted beyond recognition. Nadia tried to run, but it was too late. She had seen too much. The door had chosen her, and she was already part of it. She felt her body stiffen, her mind swirling with memories that weren't hers, sinful thoughts, dark desires, and endless, horrible whispers. She couldn't escape them. And then, with a final scream, Nadia disappeared. Years passed. The crypt was sealed once more, the door hidden from view, but the whispers remained. They lingered in the air, in the space between worlds, and one day the door reappeared. Not in a crypt, not in a forgotten ruin, but in the sterile, cold light of a museum. It was displayed on a pedestal, its teeth gleaming under the lights. People stared at it, fascinated, curious. They leaned in closer, wanting to know, wanting to understand. And just like that, the door began to grow again. Story number 9. Lena Ford had always been obsessed with unsolved mysteries. As a true crime podcaster, her job was to delve into the dark corners of the world, uncovering stories that hadn't yet been told, or those that had been hidden away in the shadows. She spent her days searching for the next big story, the next case to crack wide open. And when she stumbled upon the old apartment complex on the edge of town, She knew she'd found her next obsession. The complex was an unremarkable one. 4 small units stacked on top of each other, all of them tucked behind an old, fading wall of brick. But what piqued Lena's curiosity wasn't the apartments themselves. It was the strange rumor that had been whispered around town. A rumor that there was a 5th apartment, hidden behind a blank wall, a place that didn't appear on any floor. Plans. A place no one could explain. The tenants all seemed normal enough. Greg, the landlord, was an older man who kept to himself, rarely speaking to the tenants unless it was to collect rent. Teresa, the woman who lived on the 2nd floor, was a middle-aged teacher who had lived there for years. And then there was the young couple, Sarah and Jack, who lived on the top floor with their young daughter, Emily. They were all friendly, but Lena could tell they were hiding something, each of them more tightly wound than the last. Curiosity, as it often does, got the better of Lena. She started asking around, casually at first, mentioning the rumor of the hidden apartment, but no one seemed to want to talk about it. Greg denied its existence, his face tightening when she pressed him on the subject. Teresa was the only one who seemed to know something. One evening, as Lena passed by her door, she heard the neighbor's voice through the thin walls, speaking in hushed tones. "You don't understand, Lena," Teresa had said, looking nervous as she peeked out the door. "Some things are better left alone. The 5th apartment, it's not what you think. Trust me, you don't want to know what happened there." But Lena couldn't stop. She had to know. Her podcast depended on it. There was a story there, and she was going to uncover it, even if it meant digging into things best left forgotten. One evening. After weeks of quiet investigation, Lena stayed up late, walking through the complex, her footsteps echoing down the empty halls. It was after midnight when she heard it. Soft voices coming from behind the blank wall in the hallway. She stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. The voices were too clear, too real to be an echo or a figment of her imagination. They sounded like a family, speaking in low murmurs, too quiet to make out any words. But it was enough to make Lena's breath catch in her throat. She approached the wall slowly, pressing her ear against it. She could hear footsteps now, the sound of movement. Was it the wind? Was it just her mind playing tricks on her? Then the most unsettling thing happened. The wall creaked. A low groan, like something had shifted behind it. Lena stepped back, startled. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She glanced down the hall, but it was silent. No one else was awake. With trembling hands, she pushed against the wall, half expecting it to be solid. But to her shock, it gave way, slowly moving to reveal a narrow, hidden door. The door was old, covered in dust, and the brass handle was cool to the touch. Without thinking, Lena turned the handle and stepped inside. What she found on the other side was nothing like she expected. The room was completely normal, almost too normal, as if it were a time capsule from the past. The furniture was old-fashioned, the walls painted in a soft, faded color, and a small family was sitting around the dinner table. A mother and father, their child Emily sitting between them, eating quietly, just like any other family would. But something was off. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and when Lena took a step forward, the family didn't react. They didn't look up, didn't speak. They were too still, too lifeless in a way that made Lena's pulse race. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, a voice, low and urgent, whispered from behind her. "Don't let them see you." Lena turned quickly, but there was no one behind her. She whirled back to the family at the table, but now they were looking at her. Their eyes were wide, frozen with a vacant emptiness. Emily, the little girl, smiled at her, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was too wide, too empty, like something was missing. The mother spoke in a flat, mechanical voice. "You shouldn't be here. It's not your day." Lena froze. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" But before she could ask another question, the room shifted. It didn't move, but the atmosphere changed. The walls seemed to breathe. The air felt heavier. The family stood as if moving in slow motion, and Lena saw it, the horror behind their eyes. They were trapped in a loop, reliving the same day over and over again, unaware that they were dead. Their lives were playing out in a never-ending cycle, and Lena had stepped into it. She tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind her. Panic seized her chest. She banged on the walls, shouting for help, but no one answered. The family stood still, their eyes locked onto her with that same empty gaze. And then, it happened. The father, with a jerky movement, stepped toward her. His voice was a whisper, almost lost in the air. "You're the child. You've always been the child." Lena's heart raced. She stumbled back, confused, but then she understood. The loop, the endless cycle. It wasn't just about the family. It was about her. She wasn't supposed to be here, but somehow she had slipped into their world, and now she was them. She had become the missing child, the one who had died years ago. With a gasp, Lena's mind snapped back to the moment. She wasn't in the real world anymore. She was trapped, a part of the loop, forever reliving the day the family died. The door would never let her leave. She would never leave. The next morning, the building was back to its quiet, ordinary self. No one remembered Lena. No one spoke of the hidden fifth apartment because it had disappeared once again. But in the years to come, people would report, hearing strange noises in the halls, footsteps, whispers, the sound of a child's laughter. And one day, when the building was sold to a new owner, the hidden door would reappear. It would be unlocked, waiting for someone else to step through, someone else to take the place of the lost child, and Lena would be waiting for them. Story number 10. Curtis May had never liked the idea of death. Sure, he'd made jokes about it, the kind of dark humor that only an IT tech could appreciate, but deep down, the thought of it terrified him. He'd been working at the office building for over 5 years, buried in code and circuits, keeping systems running smoothly. He lived for routines, the predictability of it all. But that night, the fire would change everything. It started as a small spark, unnoticed by most. But in a building like theirs, old, with wiring that groaned under pressure, the fire spread fast. The alarms blared, chaos erupted, and the entire office turned into a scramble of panicked workers trying to escape. Curtis had done what anyone else would have, grabbed his jacket and ran for the stairs. But the stairwell was blocked. Smoke poured from the stairwell and the hallways were choked with panic. He tried to head for the back exit, but that was also locked. Everything was falling apart and the clock was ticking. The building, his sanctuary, had turned into a death trap. He stumbled through the smoke-filled halls, his heart pounding in his chest, his thoughts racing. Then, just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, he saw it. At the end of the hallway, there was a door. Not an exit door, not one of the usual emergency exits with the green signs. This one was just there. An unfamiliar, unmarked door. The others didn't seem to notice, but Curtis felt drawn to it. An odd magnetic pull, like it was waiting for him. He was desperate, his mind clouded with fear. "There's no time," he thought. His co-worker, Alyssa, caught up with him, her face pale, her breathing heavy. "Where are you going?" she shouted over the noise. "There's a door," Curtis said, almost to himself. "We have to try it." Alyssa hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at the others, her eyes wide with panic. Is it an escape? Maybe, Curtis said, not sure himself, but feeling a strange sense of inevitability. The fire was getting closer, and there was no time to think. The hallway felt like it was closing in. Without another word, Curtis opened the door. It wasn't a stairwell or a fire escape. It was another hallway, exactly like the one they had just come from. Same lighting, same carpet, same sterile office. Feel. But there was something off about it. The air was still and the temperature was perfect, like the fire outside didn't exist. Where are we? Alyssa asked, her voice shaky as she stepped inside. It looks like the office, Curtis finished for her, but it didn't feel like the office. It felt wrong, empty. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud, and when Curtis turned around, there was no sign of smoke, no fire, no destruction. It was just still. I thought we were escaping, Alyssa said, stepping forward. What is this? Curtis walked a few steps ahead, looking around. The hallway stretched on forever, like an endless loop of corporate gray. It was identical to the one they had just left, only there was no noise, no urgency. Everything was too quiet. He turned back to look at Alyssa. I don't know, he said, his voice tight. But I don't think we're in the same place anymore. They wandered through the hall, calling out for the others. They checked the office doors. Empty. No one else was there. No one was coming. Alyssa shook her head, her face a mixture of confusion and wonder. I think we're safe. Maybe this is heaven. Curtis stared at her, his stomach twisting. Heaven? He wanted to laugh, but the fear gnawing at him was too sharp. This wasn't heaven. This was something else. He wasn't sure what, but the room felt too perfect, too silent. It wasn't long before the oddities started. They couldn't leave. Every door they tried led them to the same hallway. No matter how many times they walked down it, they ended up back where they started. The elevators didn't work. The windows were blacked out. And worst of all, they couldn't leave. They didn't age, they didn't eat, they didn't sleep. Alyssa, ever the optimist, began to call it a blessing. We're safe here, she said with a smile, looking more and more content with each passing day. No aging, no pain, just peace. But Curtis wasn't so sure. Days stretched into weeks, then weeks into months. And still, nothing changed. The hallway remained the same. The building, this place, remained frozen in time. No one aged, no one got sick, and yet no one seemed to notice how strange it all was, except him. He started to hear whispers at night, voices that didn't belong, scratching at the back of his mind. They spoke of time, or the lack of it. Why are we here? Curtis asked, staring out the blacked-out windows. What happened to the fire? What happened to the real world? Dan, the paranoid manager, finally snapped. This is some kind of test. We were chosen, you hear me? Chosen to live forever in this place, but there's a price. I'm telling you, there's a price, and we're going to pay it. But even Dan's paranoid ramblings couldn't distract Curtis from the growing horror. Time didn't exist here, but it did out there. The real world was still moving. People were still living, still dying, while they were stuck in a twisted version of reality. And it wasn't right. Years passed. One day, as Curtis was wandering the endless halls, he found something. A door. But it was different from the others. This one had a label. Return. At a cost. His heart skipped a beat. Return. He had to know. He had to get out. But as he reached for the door handle, a cold realization gripped him. Whatever waited on the other side wasn't going to be the same world he had left behind. It couldn't be. Time had moved on without him. The world outside had gone forward and he had been left behind. A specimen. A trap. And when he stepped through the door, he knew the truth. He had been chosen. He wasn't escaping. He was just another part of the experiment, another observer trapped in an endless loop. The cost? The cost was his own soul, waiting forever for the chance to return. But always just out of reach. If you've ever wondered about the price of curiosity, now's the time to find out. Will you open the door? Will you risk stepping into the unknown? Don't miss the full story. Hit that play button and journey through a world where nothing is as it seems.